Hello and welcome to Octedgar Allan Poeber Part 3. So for the last two parts of this October reading project, I took the time out to handwrite notes upon notes on all of these different pages on the various short stories and poems and essays of Edgar Allan Poe. But I'm not going to lie, life's been kind of crazy recently. I was just out of town visiting a good buddy of mine, being hooligans like we used to be, and I just signed a lease on a house with my fiance, so there's a whole lot happening, and I know that it's always really great to dive into a lot of these works really deeply, but I've been doing notes for a lot of the past few videos, and I think I'm just gonna let it slide for this time and just talk in general about what it was like to read Edgar Allan Poe this month, because that was the whole point, to read his works. This was another really fun section. There were a lot of famous pieces for this part. There was The Raven, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Telltale Heart. And I had said before that I hadn't read any of those, but as I was getting through The Telltale Heart, I realized that a lot of it was sounding familiar, and that particular short story we read in English in middle school, I believe, and so I did have some familiarity with that, but it was good to revisit now with more context. In fact, for that one in particular, it was really starting to echo a lot of what we read during The Black Cat, because there was a dead body that was hidden in a part of the house, and there was a signal that let the police officers know that there was some fishy business going on. There were a lot of similarities there, and even though The Telltale Heart does have some differences, like with the fact that it might be looking at some mental health issues, I just thought The Black Cat was better overall. I think that it was more fleshed out, and the Black Cat as its own object was a lot more compelling. But it was just interesting that they both had those similar themes to them, because it just seemed to be during this entire reading project that I was reading online that a lot of the poems or the short stories were written way previously, but then they were revised and updated, and it seemed like Edgar Allan Poe was always looking to do that with any of the works that he had written. It was something that he wanted to perfect over time, and it wasn't just a one and done situation. He wanted to improve, rewrite. He wanted to make sure that a lot of these themes were explored to their entirety, and a lot of these themes really were explored to their entirety. One thing I can say after a month of Edgar Allan Poe is he really has his niche. He likes to focus in on a lot of these similar themes, these similar feelings, like he's always looking at somebody dying, he's always looking at something that's horrific. There's just a lot of times where I was reading through his works being like, haven't we kind of been here already? But the thing is he wrote a lot of these over extended periods of time, and so reading them all in a chunk really started to get to a point where it was almost overkill, but to another degree it was good to have all of those comparisons throughout the entire month, because like I said, I had read one story quite a while ago, but having them all side by side allowed for these comparisons to be made. And even though there were similar themes explored, I think that it was probably good for him as a writer to have these building blocks to reach these works that became classics. Like, you continue to see throughout a lot of his poetry that he writes about the death of beautiful women. That's something we've talked about during the first and second parts. But then you get to a poem like The Raven, where it's looking at that same theme again, where it is surrounding the death of a beautiful woman, but it's explored in such a unique way. The way the poem is structured, the rhyme scheme is not something that you would find in everyday poetry. It's not just this A, B rhyme scheme. It's kind of all over the place, and he has it focusing in on this really mysterious piece of this story, the raven itself. It's not another person that this narrator is talking to. It's an animal that shouldn't be able to speak, but it does. Yet it doesn't say all that much. But even within its own brief pieces where it is speaking to the narrator, it's moving that story along so much, because it's answering all of these questions that he's posing to the raven, and it drives the narrator mad. But again, it's exploring the death of a beautiful woman, but you don't see anything like that in any of his other poems. This is just exactly what I was looking for this month. I love October, I love Halloween. I have had some epic costumes in the past, especially with my fiance. We've had some good couples costumes that made some waves, but I just really wanted to dive into some stories that would have a spooky atmosphere, and Edgar Allan Poe delivered time and time again. So I consider this month to be a success, and I hope you did too. I know there were a few of you that were reading along, and some of you had the same sentiments that I did about his work repeating itself to some degree once you read enough of it, but I think that that can happen with a lot of different authors. But I absolutely loved doing this for October, and I think I'll probably explore more next October. I don't know where this channel will be by then, but I can definitely see myself getting to the rest of the bulk of this book, because even though this was quite an extensive list for this October, there's still so much more to get to with Edgar Allan Poe's work overall. There's this entire table of contents, and this was just a small fraction for what we read as opposed to what's included on this entire list. But I just think that there's just more to explore as far as we got a lot of these more popular works and some that were from the late era of Edgar Allan Poe. But I mentioned in some of the other parts, it's interesting to get some of the earlier works as well to see where he started and where he was going to move to next. There are also more essays to get into as well. I said last week that we would be getting to a more substantial essay for this week, and I think that that was true. With the poetic principle, you started to really get an idea of what Poe valued as far as poetry was concerned, and I was a little surprised to see that he valued more of a simplistic approach. He didn't need anything to be incredibly complicated. He didn't want a lot of these symbols to be a main draw of the poetry. He just wanted it to be beautiful. He wanted it to have a good rhythm, a good rhyme scheme. It was more simplistic than I thought, and it really just brought in other aspects of some of his other essays where he was just a very particular guy, and if things fell outside of his preferences, he was for sure going to let you know. But just looking at his philosophy on his poetic writing, it was just really fascinating, because a lot of times we read the works of various authors and don't get that extra perspective outside of that writing. And so even though we did cover some good essays here, there was another one that I had seen online that focused on his writing in general as opposed to just with poetry. I think it was Philosophy of Composition. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but after the success of The Raven, he went on to write this to show how he got to that finished product, and I think that that will be interesting as well. And again, we didn't get to it this time because there's so much to read, but that could be reading material for the future, if not in the next couple of months, next October as well. Just a couple more quick thoughts here. On the music side of my life, I've made it a priority to look at classic albums and influential albums. I continue to do so today just because I think it's important to understand where the music of today came from. A lot of these albums influenced great musicians who influenced other great musicians, and it might not be a direct link, but it all started somewhere. And so on the literature side of my life this year, I've been kind of doing the same thing. I'm looking at some authors that maybe I won't enjoy, but I know that their work is influential, or a particular piece is really influential, because it's the same idea. Even though one of your favorite writers from today might not be directly influenced from one of these famous writers of the past, more likely than not, that writer has influenced a writer a next generation down the line, and that writer's influenced another writer in the next generation down the line, and it really travels to the present day. And so with Edgar Allan Poe, I think I've really filled in an important piece here. I've been looking at Shakespeare, which of course is earlier on in history, but Edgar Allan Poe does fill a significant gap in a lot of my reading, And so I think not only has it been really great to read these spooky stories for Halloween, it's just also been good to read a writer that has been this influential to writers overall. And so for that, again, this month has been a success. So with that, that's a clean wrap-up of Octedgar Allan Poeber. We can finally put this monster to rest. I apologize that I didn't do the same extensive videos that I had done for part 1 and part 2. Like I said, life's been crazy the last week and a half, so if you're looking for a more in-depth discussion on any of the poems or short stories or the essay that we read this week, definitely comment below. I'm going to go back to the other ones and comment on those as well. I've been pretty bad recently, but I do appreciate everybody taking the time to write out your comments if you've been reading along. And like I said, if you are still looking to discuss a little bit deeper, you can put those down below and I'll be sure to get to them soon. So with that checked off and my yearly trek to my favorite cider mill complete, I am officially ready for Halloween. I hope you all have a great and safe Halloween. If you have some creative costumes, I'd love to hear about those as well. But I'll be seeing you again on Friday for the next ShakeTube video. And who knows, maybe you'll see me again next October reading more Edgar Allan Poe. Thanks for watching. See you soon.